The end of Parshat Noach discusses the story of Migdal Bavel. At first glance, this is a simple story of sin and punishment. The people of Shinar decide to build for themselves a city and a tower. Hashem finds their deeds objectionable and thwarts their plans by mixing up their languages and dispersing them throughout the land. On closer inspection, though, we wonder, if this is a story of sin and punishment, what exactly was the sin? How does the punishment attempt to solve the problem? Moreover, why did the people desire to build a city in the first place? This class question is addressed explicitly by the text. We read that the people say, Hava nivne lanu ir, u'migdal v'rosho b'shamayim. Let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose head will be in the heavens. V'naseh lanu shem pen nafutz al pnei chol haaretz, and we'll make for ourselves a name, lest we disperse amongst the land. The verse raises more questions than it answers. To begin with, what's the relationship between the Ir and the Migdal? Which of the two was the primary focus of the building project? Second, the word Vrosho Bashamayim. Is this simply a figure of speech, a means of expressing that they wanted to build a tower that was going to be very tall? Or did the people actually think that they could somehow literally reach the heavens? And if so, with what goal? Finally, the people express both a desire to make for themselves a name and a fear lest they disperse. What is the relationship between these two different objectives? Are they two distinct goals, or perhaps is one a means to attain the other? Moving to Hashem's reaction. What about the building project did Hashem find so objectionable that he decided that he needed to actively intervene? Which part of the people's plan did he find so troubling? Surely he was not worried that the people would actually reach the heavenly throne. And why would he be so upset about the fact that they wanted to live together? Finally, one last question. What is the Torah's purpose in recounting this enigmatic episode? Is the Torah merely sharing with its readers the progression of human development, how languages were created, and how the world was populated? Or does it perhaps have a more deeper meaning that it wants to impart? How does our story relate to its context? Does it serve to conclude the Noach narratives that came before it, or perhaps to introduce the Abraham narratives that follow? Commentators struggle with these issues and emerge with vastly different readings of our story. A first approach, taken by several midrashim and modern scholars as well, suggests that our story is a polemic against paganism, a story of human rebellion against God. Thus, Breshit Rabbah reads, Dvarim achadim, shamru dvarim chadim al Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. The people said sharp things against the concept that God is one. Al Hashem amru, lo kol himenu lavur lo et ha'elyonim v'litin lanu et ha'tachtonim, ela bo na'aseh lanu migdal v'na'aseh avodah zarah b'rosho v'nitin cherev biyada v'tihi nir'et ki'ilu osai imo melchama. The people complain, it's not fair that Hashem took for himself the heavens and gave us only the earth. Let's build a tower and put an idol on top of it with a sword in its hand so it can wage war against God. The Midrash is obviously doing a play on words with the word achadim and chadim and echad. But is this really the simple meaning of the text? That our story is really talking about idolatry? That this phrase means that the people wanted to do idolatrous worship? It seems that the Midrash might be picking up on another word in our story, the phrase V'rosho Bashamayim, and understanding that the people literally wanted to reach the heavens and wage war against Hashem. Rashbam, though, asks, if one looks at other usages of this phrase throughout Tanakh, it seems that the phrase has nothing to do with idolatry. The words V'rosho Bashamayim simply mean building something very tall. And if so, once again we ask, is it fair to insert idolatry into our story? Knowledge of the ancient Near East would suggest that actually it is. Professor Kasuto and others suggest that the building of the tower in our story fits with what we know of Mesopotamian ziggurats. These step-like pyramidal structures were temple complexes, homes to idolatrous worship, and found in almost every city in the ancient Near East, with a particularly massive one in Bavel. The Midrash, like modern scholars, but unlike the medieval Rashbam, would have been very aware of these structures and naturally read them into the text. Kasuto, in fact, suggests that the entire story is a satire, mocking such pagan beliefs and practices and the accompanying hubris. He says, "Af al pi sharaka hasipur ho-Mesopotami, ein lo hakbala b'sifrut ha-Mesopotamit k'mo sheyesh l'maseh Bereshit u'l'maseh ha-Mabul." He points out that almost every story in the beginning of Sefer Bereshit has a parallel in Mesopotamian literature. Our story is the one exception. V'ulam ein leitpaleh al choser ha-hakbalot. But he says we shouldn't be surprised by this lack. B'toch ha'amim אי אפשר שתימצאנה הקבלות כאלה, מכיוון שכל עצם הסיפור אינו אלא מחאה נגד השקפותיהם של אותם העמים. לפנינו מעין סאטירה נגד מה שהיה לפאר ולכבוד בעיני הבבלים. בכל אחת מן הערים הגדולות במסופוטמיה היו מקדשי האלים הודה ותפארתה. על כל ההתפארות הזאת ועל כל הגאווה מביט סיפורנו כמתוך בת צחוק. He says our story is a satire against pagan beliefs and practices, against all that they thought was their pride and glory. Our story mocks their beliefs and laughs at what they found to be something as a source of pride. Kasuto combines two issues, pride and idolatry, suggesting that somehow inherent in the worship of idols is also worship of the self, the desire, lasot lanu shem, to make for ourselves a name. As such, our story perhaps serves to introduce the Avraham narratives, setting up a contrast between a mode of worship which we don't want and the preferred mode of worship demonstrated by Avraham. Professor Elitzor points out that while the Babylonians went around wanting to make a name for themselves, Avraham, in contrast, went throughout the land and was korei b'shem Hashem. He cried out in the name of Hashem, a very different religious outlook. And of course, in response, Hashem tells Avraham that as a reward, v'agadla shemecha, I will make your name great. Thus, we have an approach that at first glance might seem to have very little textual support, but actually has quite a lot going for it. Nonetheless, there is one weakness that we must point out. The approach does not adequately address or explain the second objective stated by the people, their fear of dispersal, pen nafutz pnei kol haaretz. What does this fear of dispersal have to do with a desire for idolatry? This then leads to other Mefarshim, amongst them Rashbam, Ibn Ezra, and Rabag, who suggest that maybe we shouldn't be focusing on the words V'rosho b'shamayim, nor on the phrase V'naseh lanu shem, but rather on this issue of dispersal, on the words pen nafutz pnei kol haaretz. They suggest that in building the city and the tower was not the focus of the building project, but rather the city. The people had wanted to make for themselves a place where they can all live together. The tower was merely a landmark so that if anyone got lost, they can make their way back to the city. We wonder, though, what did Hashem find so problematic about a desire to live together? Rashbam answers, Lefi hapshat, ma chat'u dor hapalaga, ela lefi shetzivam hakadosh baruch hu pru urvu u'mil'u et haaretz, v'him bacharu lehem makom lashevet sham, v'amru pen nafutz. He questions, what was the sin of the generation of the dispersal? And answers, Hashem, in the beginning of Sefer Bereshit, commands the people to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth. As such, the people's decision to stay put in one place went directly against this directive of Hashem. Rashbam views this as a sin, as a defiance of God's will. But one need not look at it like that, and in fact, Ibn Ezra suggests that perhaps instead of looking at this story as one of sin and punishment, we should see it as a mistake and a corrective. He writes, Im histakanu derech hapshat, re'inu ki lo ne'enshu anshe dor hapalaga, rak shenafotzu apnei kol haaretz, hefach machshavatam. He says, if you look at our story carefully, we need not say that the people were punished. Rather, Hashem scattered them against their intentions, but not as a punishment. He suggests that when Hashem said Mil'u Ta'aretz, this was likely not heard by mankind. The people in Bavel, when they build their city, have no intentions of defying God. They simply think that living together in one place will be a good idea. This, of course, begs the question, well, why didn't Hashem agree? Why does Hashem say Mil'u Ta'aretz, that we should fill the land? Why doesn't he too think that maybe we should stay put and live together? Most of the Mefarshim do not address the question. Ralbag, though, suggests that actually Hashem had mankind's welfare in his mind when he said Mil'u Ta'aretz. Ralbag suggests that Hashem was worried that if all of the people of the world lived in one place, that they would be risking all dying in case there happened to have been a natural disaster. He writes, ולפי שכבר ראה השם יתברך שהקיבוץ לאדם במקום אחד מהארץ היא בלתי נאות לקיום המין האנושי, לפי שכבר אפשר שיקרה במקום הפסד, אם מצד הרעש וההפיכה, אם מצד אבני על גביש. והנה השם עשה זה להשגיח במין האנושי. He says, Hashem realized that if everyone lived in one place, there was potential for natural disasters such as an earthquake, an upheaval, and if so, all of mankind could be wiped out at once. One might question Ralbag. Why didn't Hashem just ensure that he doesn't bring a natural disaster? Ralbag answers, that's not the way Hashem works. Hashem runs his world through natural means, and if such, it's possible that a natural disaster can happen. We might still question, but if Hashem is intervening right now, what's the difference? Ralbag would answer, don't read our story and the emergence of different languages and the dispersal of the people as a supernatural phenomenon that happened overnight. Rather, he suggests, it's much more likely that this was a gradual, natural process that took place over years. This approach, then, in contrast to the first one, reads our story not as the introduction to the Avraham narratives, but rather as a conclusion to the Noach story. It complements chapter 10, which talks about the branching out of nations. In both chapters, we see the same verb, nafat. Whereas chapter 10 talks about how this occurred on a human level, our chapter talks about how Hashem's hand guided the process all along. This brings us to one last approach. It reads the story on the backdrop of the recreation of the world after the Mabul and the soon-to-be selection of Avraham, suggesting that our story provides guidelines of how to build a moral civilization. Both the Ran and the Netziv point specifically to the dangers of centralized government. The Netziv picks up on the opening of our story, Vayhi kol haaretz safa achat udvarim achadim. And he says, Ulelamdenu delo mishum hadvarim hitorer hakadosh baruch hu, ki im bishvil shehayu achadim, yiyu ma shehiyu. He points out Hashem doesn't tell us the content of these few words that the people were speaking, because the problem wasn't the dvarim, but rather the very fact that they were few. The Netziv suggests that our story depicts a totalitarian regime, a dictatorship, where the dictator believed that there's only one safa, that there are only few words, one opinion, his opinion, one way of looking and doing things, his way. Any dissenting opinions would have been quieted. The dangers described by the Netziv are familiar to all of us because throughout history we have always seen how totalitarian regimes and dictatorships can often wreak havoc and destroy lives and the world around them. The Ran in principle agrees with the Netziv's reading of our story, but he also points out that the concept of centralized government, the idea that world unity is bad, is not necessarily true, inherently so. He says, actually, world unity and centralization of government might actually be a utopian ideal, and will be realized in messianic times. However, until that point, there is a danger. Because if world leadership is given into the hands of the wrong person, someone who has the wrong ideals and the wrong values, this could bring disaster upon mankind. He further points out that Hashem recognized that there was a need for balance of power, for checks and balances against such totalitarian leaders. And so Hashem set up competing forms of government. Without this, he suggests, perhaps the existence of Israel would have been at stake. He points out that throughout the centuries, often Israel found herself to be that dissenting opinion. When there was a safa achat, they were often the safa acheret. In the places that they found themselves, they were often oppressed and even expelled because of their different beliefs. And the Ran suggests that had Hashem not set up alternate systems of government and other places to be safe harbors, perhaps Israel would have been lost. And so, we see three very different readings of our story. Those that read it as a polemic against paganism, those that see in it a history of the development of the world, and third, those who see it as a guideline for building a moral society. Along the way, our Mefarshim give us many points to ponder and thoughts to think about. Kasuzo tells us, think about the relationship between pride and idolatry, and on the flip side, between humility and belief in Hashem. Rabag reminds us not to put all of our eggs in one basket. Ibn Ezra suggests that we think about our perspective on sin and punishment. How would looking at different events in Torah and in our personal lives, not as sin and punishment, but rather as mistaken corrective, affect our viewpoint and change our perspective? Finally, the Ran and the Netziv question the balance between unity and pluralism, questioning what's the ideal and when. For further discussion of these issues and a host of primary sources and other topics on Parshat Noach, please look at al-attorah.org.